And that's when we lost our connection. Our next guest is the founder and chairman of the Sana Center for Strategic Studies, an independent think tank which focuses on Yemen and the surrounding region. Farea Al-Muslimi is also an associate fellow at Chatham House. He joined me in our Ottawa studio. We've heard so much about the humanitarian situation, but there's also, this is a war that's going on in Yemen now. How would you describe the situation on the ground in that context?
I mean, yes, we have the biggest humanitarian crisis in the world at the moment and in modern history, but that's a consequence of the original crisis, which is a combination of failed state, failed government, and most importantly also foreigner intervention in the country. So it's not a domestic one or an aid problem or a proxy war. It's a combination of all of them. It's a little bit a proxy war, it's a little bit local war, it's a little bit a decentralization war. But in either way, I think right now the biggest price for it so far has been the economic war. You have, in Yemen right now, you have the biggest humanitarian crisis in the entire world at the moment. It's the biggest thing happening. The Yemeni rial has gone from 215 rials per $1 to 740 rials over the last 3 years, something that's beyond unbelievable. And this has a lot of consequences because the country only depends mainly on imports for food from Yemen. It only comes from outside the country. And that's another level of the issue, I think, right now. At the moment, you have 2 planes that serve 27 million people. 2 planes, there is more than 1,000 that lands every day in Toronto, something unbelievable.
And yet there's even talk now about the port at Hodeidah and the fact that that may in fact be closed off even further, that it may make it even more difficult to get.
That will definitely, if it happens, that battle, it will escalate the humanitarian and economic situation in the country overall. I think the Western powers will be as complicit as the Russians in helping Assad take over Aleppo if they let that thing happen. This is not a matter of just the aid, it's also about goods. You have the international government, yes, the internationally recognized government, it runs 75% of the geography of Yemen, but 75% of the population are under the Houthi territories. And that's why the Hodeidah port is the main source of life in Yemen at the moment. It definitely will escalate things worse in every possible way if you think about it, if it goes forward.
So many countries have a hand in this.
So little doesn't.
Pardon me?
So little don't have hands.
So little don't have.
Including Canada, which is big in Yemen's war, whether it comes to the armed deals, whether it comes to the political. Yes, they don't have a buy-in in the conflict, but they have a lot of silence in it, and that's a problem. And that's why I think ultimately even the Saudis went all the way to Canada for a fight. You let them get away with Yemen's war. You then let them get away with the problems they started with Qatar. Then you let them get away with starting Hariri arrest of a Lebanese prime minister in Saudi. Then you let them round up a bunch of businessmen in a hotel and imprison them. Then they get into Qatar. Then they get into Canada. And finally now they get into Jamal Khashoggi. It's a series of events that has been happening for the last 3 years, and Saudi has been getting away with it. And the only times where someone stood up for this reckless policy, it was alone, like when Canada stood up, and it was alone in that. So it wasn't a collective international policy that says, actually, this is wrong, what you're doing in Yemen is wrong, and is actually helping your enemy contrary to what you think.
So what does the international community, Canada included, have to do now?
A lot of things. I think there needs to be a resumption of talks. We haven't had a round of negotiation for more than 2 years. This didn't happen in any other way. There has to be more pressure in opening Sana'a airport. Can you believe we have 2 planes that serve 27 million people? That doesn't exist anywhere in the world. There must be something good and rare Canada has been doing, is supporting the group of eminent experts at the United Nations Human Rights Council, and it should continue doing so. It should push for the political process, but I think also the other unique position for Canada, because right now, of course, for obvious reason, is not necessarily its relationship with Saudi Arabia, but actually its relationships with other members of the coalition, like UAE, like Jordan, like Egypt, like Morocco. These are countries more allergic to pressure. And it also is not necessarily looked as an enemy by the Iranians. So they can actually increase their foreign policy diplomacy when it comes to Yemen. Canada's foreign policy is very feminist, but not necessarily pro-peace, and that's a serious problem.
Why has Yemen become the focal point for all of these countries? Why are there so many hands in a small country, a very poor country, even before the war began?
I think your last part of the question answers the first, because it's a poor country. It's a very cheap to actually do proxy wars there. Think about it if you're the Iranians. You're going to throw $2,000 instead of $2 million in Syria. And for the Saudis, it's the same. It's a domestic affairs. It's not a foreigner affairs. It's not an external affairs. And then in addition to that is no one has been held accountable so far. No one, even those Western countries that were involved in this war, no one has been actually been called out or actually have been facing pressure. And let alone we don't send refugees. We receive refugees in Yemen. We have around 2 million from the Horn of Africa. We receive refugees more than the strongest 6 GDP countries in the world. Can you believe that? And we're the poorest country in the world at the moment with the humanitarian crisis. But we do not send refugees outside. We have 3 million IDPs. That also, in a way, no one has paid the price for this war except Yemenis. And that's why it's less talked about, and that's internationally. And that's why also everyone is part of the problem so far in Yemen right now, and very few are not part of the problem. And actually, if they're not part of the problem, they're not part of the solution, they're rather part of the silence, which is in a way part of the problem.
Of course.
Yeah.
How optimistic are you that there will be a ceasefire?
I think the end goal is not necessarily a ceasefire, but necessarily a peace. A ceasefire can happen and end and happen and end. We have tried that a few times in the past. But if there is, right now we have a rare international moment. Yesterday, the United States, the United Kingdom, before yesterday, they called for a ceasefire in Yemen and for de-escalation of hostilities and so on, and that's rare. This is important, and we have a new UN envoy, and the problem is not as much as complicated as Syria or Libya. So if there is enough international will, actually it can be solved. So far there was just no will. There was no buy-in for peace in Yemen. I think there is a will to solve Syria's war and Libya's war, but there is no ability. In Yemen, there is an ability, but there is no will, and that's the difference. Right now, it seems to be in the conversation for the first time, serious conversation. Even Canada was more local about Raif Badawi or about Hariri crisis than it was about the worst humanitarian crisis in modern history. Let's not forget that. It has been a forgotten crisis. At the moment, it's being thought of, partially also because everyone is tired of Syria, but also partially because there is a sudden international attention on Saudi, and of course because that's how it should be, right? I mean, there should be a focus and importance in this crisis.
I know you've been there recently. Even if this is resolved, once this is resolved, let's put an optimistic tone to it, what will be left of your country?
I mean, of course, right now, as I said, the humanitarian and the economic crisis is the worst, which terrifies me more than anything else, probably. I mean, in Yemen, we have had wars before, not in this scale. We have had peace, and I think it's possible. I know it seems surprising to a lot of people, but I worry about Saudi's future from this war more than I worry about Yemen.
In what way?
I mean, it's a country that has a legacy of conflicts and conflict resolutions. Imagine if you in Canada had 10% of the violence we have had in Yemen, or if it happened in the United States of America, you would have disappeared from the map. This is a country, in a way, functions and have managed to survive from wars or from ends. You know, Yemen was a Queen of Sheba in the Bible 3,000 years ago. It's a country that is dynamic, and that always, again, has been purposefully because of foreigner interventions, all the way from the Ottomans to the Egyptians to the Iranians to the Saudis. Always there was a foreigner intervention, but always all types and all levels of foreigner intervention have had to lose and leave. And I mean, read what the Ottomans say or what the Egyptians. And this country managed to stay up into that. I think I'm worried more about the state fragmentation, and that's, I think, a serious problem for the first time. I'm worried from the increasing international and regional, specifically regional media polarization, more from the regional escalation between Iran and Saudi, because every poor country and weak country pays the price for that. But I don't think it's a hopeless case. And I think it has a shot to solve the war more than Syria and more than Libya. And it's a different position in kind of the region, but also the world so far.
Thank you for your perspective and your expertise.
Thank you very much.